Okay, we are going to be trying to go through Revelation 17 and Revelation 18 tonight. They're connected. Revelation 17 introduces the great harlot and who she is, and Revelation 18 is ultimately her judgment and destruction. Okay, so we're going to go through this and try to make sense of everything that's happening. Again, remember, this is a vision or a revelation of God coming to John in form of a vision. And please also understand, God is trying to explain in these later chapters really the answer to the prayers of the saints that have been martyred. They were crying out to God and wondering when God was going to take vengeance for them. And now we have that moment where this vengeance is finally being enacted by God on Rome and the Roman Empire. Okay? So, notice verses 1 through 5, we get a description of this great harlot. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, which we talked about last week, came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, and whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality." I like the New King James where it says they committed acts of fornication, immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. There is that phrase again, those who dwell on the earth. Those who dwell on the earth are the ones that have received the mark of the beast, the ones that have left God, and they have fully committed themselves to Rome, and they have drunk the wine. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, which we saw the same thing happen in chapter 1 and in chapter 4. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names. Now, scarlet is the color for the Roman Empire. That was their colors that they had for their uniforms and things along those lines. Full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay? We'll learn a little bit about this later, but this is that same beast that was described in Revelation chapter 13, the one with 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and silver. Those colors are symbolic of riches. Purple, obviously, if you read about Lydia, she was a seller of purple. Purple was a very, very expensive dye. To be able to get a hold of and to have purple garments meant you had money. And so we see purple and scarlet being mixed together to really shine a light on this rich Roman person that's being portrayed here. And adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. So we have this depiction of this great harlot. Now, I hope all of you understand what harlotry was back then. I don't want to have to explain that. The fun explanation I got when I was in school was an older lady, very wise, said, I don't really like to say harlot or prostitute. I say a lady of the night, okay? So that may be a kinder way of saying she was a lady of the night. So this great harlot, notice this is the mother of all harlots and of the abominations of the earth, okay? And notice how she is also referred to, Babylon the Great, okay? That will come into play a little bit later. So the great harlot is known as Babylon the Great. Now, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints. That should ring some bells as to who this great harlot is and how God is enacting this judgment upon Rome because of the persecution that has happened to his followers while they have lived under this empire. So, in the blood of the witnesses of Jesus, when I saw her, I wondered greatly, or some translations will say, I marveled at her. See, John is trying to understand all of this while he is seeing this vision as he was carried away by the Spirit to be able to see this. This is kind of one of those commentator notes here where John, the writer, is saying, man, I was just trying to figure this out when I was seeing this and wondering who she is. And the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. See, the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come. That list of 3 phrase there should hopefully ring a bell in your head and remind you of who God is, right? God who was, who is, and is to come, as opposed to this temporal empire who was, who is, and is about to come, but ultimately the coming is going to come to destruction, okay? Who's going to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. So we have a contrast between the eternal God versus this temporal empire. And those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundations of the world, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. Okay? 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has yet to come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. Now, there have been speculations as to who are these kings, and I'm going to, when we get to the next slide, I'll try to make some clarification as to what is happening here. Some have tried to say this is this king coming, these are the different kings. And so, for instance, Vespasian would be the one who is, some people or some scholars will say, and then you have other kings, Augustus, Tiberius, Gaius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. You have all these different ones that could be this, but I just want you to appease this argument for just a second. Notice what happens in verse 11. So he's talking about these 7 kings upon which the woman sits, 7 emperors of this Roman Empire. Notice verse 11. The beast, which was and is not, is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. Now, that's confusing, because now he's talking about there's 7 kings, right? There's these 7 heads to this beast, which represent the 7 mountains upon which the woman sits, which represents 7 kings, but now there's an 8th king. What in the world? That doesn't make sense. The math is not mathing, okay? Remember the number 7 as you have gone through the book of Revelation. This isn't a literal number 7. This is a perfect amount of kings that are going to be reigning during this empire, okay? And so please understand that there is going to be, because sometimes people will say there's contradictions in the book of Revelation because there were more than 7 emperors from the time of which this is written to the time of Rome's final destruction. And so please understand, I think John is trying to give us a symbol of there is going to be a perfect amount of emperors that come about under this empire, and they will be used by this great harlot, okay? The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for an hour, okay? You think that's a literal hour? Do not think that. Again, figuratively, supposed to represent this short temporal amount of time, because remember, this Roman Empire, it was and it is and it's coming to destruction, okay? It was and is not, and it's coming to destruction. And so it's this temporal empire, and that again is represented in this idea of 1 hour in which these 10 horns or 10 kingdoms are representing. So from what scholars have said, these are more of these provincial kingdoms that are reigning underneath the Roman umbrella. So when Rome would go in and they would take over a community, they would set up these leaders in these different areas. Maybe they call them governors or prefects or whatever it may be. These are these 10 horns, these kings that are given power from the beast. You think about Herod the Great, right? Or Herod in general. He was a king set up by the Roman government to help control the Jewish population. Okay, that's who these 10 horns are. They're these kings that receive their power from the beast. Notice verse 13, it helps you out. It says, these have one purpose. They give their power and authority to the beast. They are helping the beast in what they're doing. They're giving more power back to the beast because of the ruling that they're doing. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them because he is Lord of lords, he's King of kings, and those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Okay? So that's a cool verse, by the way, just to talk about those who follow the Lord. Those who follow the Lamb, they're the ones that are called and they're chosen, and they're those who are trusting and faithful in him. And then he said to me, the waters which you saw, again, this angel is trying to explain this mystery of what John is marveling at or wondering about. So now he's also saying to John, you know the waters that you saw at the very beginnings of this chapter that this woman was on, the great harlot was on? You see, the harlot sits. These are the peoples, the multitudes, nations, and tongues. Okay, you have to remember, you have to put yourself in that context back then. You can even put yourself in the context of America before the automobile came about, okay? You wanted to be next to water, because if you were next to water, you had trade. And that's what this is representing. This great harlot was on these many waters, and many different peoples and all these different nations were coming to her to be able to sell and to be a part of this economy. And it was a great economy because of all the different trade that was able to happen in Rome, okay? So, hopefully this will help you understand. Here is an explanation of those different symbols that are in here. The harlot would be the city of Rome, the great harlot. The beast is ultimately the Roman Empire. And now that helps you understand the city of Rome was where all the power, where all the economy was, and that's ultimately what drove the Roman Empire. The 7 heads would have been emperors of Rome, and the 10 horns would have been allied kings, okay? Kings of smaller nations that were there to support the Roman Empire. Now, as John has just been given an explanation of all of what's happening here, now we're going to dive into its destruction and its judgment. Okay? Notice, in the 10 horns which you saw and the beast, these will hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Again, another clue as to telling you this is the Roman Empire. And this woman is a depiction of Rome that ruled over this empire. Okay? Now, chapter 17 teaches us some wonderful things. First, it clearly helps describe the corrupt nature of the oppressive power of the Roman government, particularly Rome, and how it brought in all of these nations and all these different things, and sin was at the very top of their list, okay? It also describes how the Roman rule was very tyrannical, right? It ruled with an iron fist, if I can use that metal to kind of connect us back to Daniel. Also, it assures and helps the reader know that Rome and her imperial succession is headed for destruction. That is seen through, again, that phrase that's repeated over and over of who was, who is not, and who is coming ultimately to destruction. Then finally, it teaches that this destruction will come from within and will be brought about by the plan of God. It wasn't some crazy, even more powerful empire that came in. It was ultimately God's plan to have this empire implode on itself because of the corruption that was in it and because of the evil and the sin that ultimately caused this entire empire and this city, and more particularly, to fall. Okay? Now, here comes fallen is Babylon. And remember, if you remember in Revelation 17, we have this great harlot who is talked about as this great city of Babylon. Okay? Now, we're going to go past this one. That one's a little bit more scary. Chapter 18. After these things, so after I received this wondrous, this marvelous, trying to figure out this mystery of these different symbols and all these different things that are happening in this vision, John says, after these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven. This one is not a part of the angels that have the 7 bowls with the 7 wraths and the judgments and plagues and all that. This is a different one. And this angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory, he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, now, you can go back to chapter 10, verse 1, and this could help you figure out, again, were you seeing this same angel again? Some have said this would be the glorified Christ coming down, maybe, or it's just an angel that's coming down from heaven that has great authority and is illumined with his glory. Okay? So, this angel is crying out, fallen is Babylon the Great. She, notice the feminine pronoun, she has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality. And merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. Okay? This is trying to help you understand really what was happening all the way back in Revelation 12 when we talked about the woman. God took care of her as Satan poured out this flood to try and drown the woman. God took the woman and kept her safe in the wilderness for 3.5 times, right? And the world swallowed up that flood. See, that's the same idea here. It's more realized here of what that swallowing up those waters from Satan really looks like. They've drunk the wine, or some people will say today they've drunk the Kool-Aid, right? They drunk the wine of the passion of her immorality. The kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality or immorality. The same idea there, right? People are so excited about getting rich and all of these different things and the wonderful things that are happening for them, the sinful things that are happening for them in this town. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive of her plagues. Now, this is interesting because this voice from heaven, we most likely could think of it as God's voice, is crying out now to his people. And he says, I want you to come out of that city. Why? So they will not participate in her sins, number one. And then number two, so they don't receive the judgments or the plagues that are going to be cast upon this city. Okay, now I want us to think about some things as we go through this, or as we're looking at this. Okay? This voice seems to be reminiscent of the words we find in Isaiah chapter 52, verse 11, where the Lord admonishes the people to separate themselves from all uncleanness. This is the idea of pulling yourself away from this. Okay? Even Jesus will say, we are in this world, but we're not to be of this world, right? And so I was reading through this verse, and I wanted to make sure we make connection with ourselves in this verse as well. And so we see the message for us in verse 4, if something is going to cause us to fall into sin, to participate in sin, maybe it's living in a certain community, right? For this particular group of people who was living in the Roman city, if they were going to live in the city of Rome, God was worried they would participate in those sins, or maybe it's being surrounded by a group of people that would cause us to go into sin or just overcome us with that temptation to sin. Now, I want you to think about these statements. The more we allow sin to be in our lives, the harder it will be for us to detach ourselves from it. Think about that for a second. The more we let something just sit in our lives, the more we let something be in our lives that is sinful, the harder it will become for us to detach ourselves from it. That's why it's so important, and that's why God here is calling his people out. He doesn't want any more to receive the mark of the beast, to denounce him, to follow after this government, this power that's going on right now. And so I want you to think about three things as you go throughout the rest of this week, and we'll continue on with this lesson. Where am I too comfortable with the world in my life? Okay? Now, when I say the world, I'm talking about sin in general. Where am I too comfortable with that? Is it what I watch? Is it what I listen to? Is it the people I'm around? Is it the things that I'm allowing myself to be into? And things like that. Be thinking about that. Number two, what attitudes, habits, or influences am I tolerating in my life or with people around me? Lastly, where do I look more like culture than I look like Christ? Okay? Something for us to think about as we go throughout our lives and how God is taking it so seriously to call these people. And notice he goes on in verse 5 to say, for her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. God is striking judgment upon the Roman city, and he doesn't want his people to be a part of that. Pay her back even as she has paid. Give back to her double according to her deeds. In the cup which she has mix twice as much for her. To the degree that she has glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning. For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for the Lord God who judges her is strong. Now connect that with that very next verse. And the kings of the earth who have committed acts of immorality and lived sensuously with her will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, woe, woe, the great city, Babylon, the strong city. The strong city was never going to be able to stand up against the strong God. For in 1 hour her judgment has come. That 1 hour is a temporal number to help you understand that Rome was not around that long in the grand scheme of history. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and every kind of citron wood and every article of ivory and every article made from very costly wood and bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and spice and incense and perfume and frankincense and wine and olive oil and fine flour. There's lots of stuff that they were selling. Okay? Now, I also noticed at the very end, they were also selling slaves and human lives. Nobody was buying that anymore because now the Roman city has been destroyed. Babylon the Great has fallen. God has destroyed this city. And now the merchants are upset. They weep and they mourn because there goes all of our money. We have no more money. Verse 19, and they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, in which all who had ships at sea became rich by her wealth, for in her 1 hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. It's an encouraging verse for me, because I know that there have been people that have wronged me, and I pray for them, and I hope that one day they will repent of their sins and come to God and be obedient to Him. But I also know that I don't have to take vengeance out for myself, because God will do it for me. You see, early on in Revelation, these people are crying out to God, and God said, okay, just be patient. I'll do it, I promise. And He does it. Then a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and he threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon the great city be thrown down with violence. It will not be found any longer. And the sound of the harpists and the musicians and the flute players and the trumpeters will not be heard in you any longer, nor craftsmen of any craft will be found in you any longer, and the sound of a mill will not be heard in you any longer. The light of a lamp will not shine in you any longer. The voice of the bridegroom and the bride will not be heard in you any longer, for your merchants were the great men of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and of all who have been slain on the earth. So we have this final judgment finally being pronounced against these people, against this city. And God is helping them understand throughout this poetic ending that all of this was going to be destroyed. There would be no more joy. There would be no more money making. There would be none of this. And we're reminded at the very end, in verse 24, of why this happened. Because the blood of the prophets and of the saints and all who have been slain on the earth. God is finally having His judgment cast upon Rome. Okay, so again, some wonderful things that we can learn from this and help us understand that God is a just God, and He will make sure to take vengeance out on those who are not with Him. And so we always want to make it aware and offer the invitation, if you are in need of responding to God's call and obey His gospel message by having your sins washed away in the waters of baptism. I'll remind you again, there's no water back there, but we can go find some. Okay, so if you're someone who is ready to become a child of God, we'd love for tonight to be that night. Or if you're someone who is in need of prayers, we'd love to pray with you and encourage you. We just ask that if you have any need, you come while we stand and sing the song of encouragement. Oh.